So we're on chapter 5 of Shaar HaYichud VeHaEmunah. And I'm going to warn you that this is a very short but very difficult chapter. Very short and very difficult. I'm going to do my best to teach it. If you ever want to look in the lessons in Tanya, Shurim B'Sefer Tanya, which is, sometimes people ask me, like, what books are good on Tanya? And the reality is, I don't really know, because I don't keep up on the modern commentaries on Tanya. But Shurim B'Sefer Tanya is as close to an official commentary on Tanya from the Rebbe as you can get, as close to it as you can get, because Rabbi Weinberg, who wrote lessons in Tanya as scripts for his radio show, his Tanya radio show, would submit those scripts to the Rebbe for review, and the Rebbe would make comments. So that's about as close as we have to something that was officially approved by the Rebbe. And it's interesting, and I don't say this to disparage the work, Shurim B'Sefer Tanya. As I hope I just made clear, it's probably about as official as you can get. But what's funny to me is that the style of Shurim B'Sefer Tanya is it gives commentary in between the lines of Tanya. In chapter 5 it does that, but then at the end of the whole chapter 5 it says, oh, and by the way, there's a sikha from the Rebbe, I think it's Parshas Mishpatim Tov Chav Vav, where the Rebbe asks several questions about this chapter, and basically here's the sikha. So what I'm saying is, instead of taking the Rebbe's explanation of the chapter and weaving it in to the text of Tanya as a commentary, it basically just takes the Rebbe's sikha and pretty much it's more than a paraphrase. It's a pretty close translation of the whole sikha. What I'm saying is, the way that Rebbe takes apart this chapter and asks questions about the chapter and then finally answers all of those questions is so complex that it's very hard to take it and plug it back into the chapter as you go. I once did this. People don't know about it because it never came out, but I wrote a commentary in English on Shaar HaYichud VeHaEmunah for Kahos. It never came out, and I don't know when it is coming out, but I did it over 10 years ago, at least. And there, to the best of my ability, it was far from a perfect job, but I tried to take that sikha where the Rebbe explains chapter 5 and plug it back into the text of chapter 5 as you go. I did my best, so I don't know. But since it never came out, nobody will know if I didn't do a great job.
You always give it to us.
I don't have it anymore. It was a Word doc from 10 computers ago, so I don't have it. Okay. I'll also tell you, this is a very long way of building up the chapter, but I have time because you're going to see the chapter's super short, and I don't have a lot to explain on it as we go because it's so abstruse, which is one of the Rebbe's main questions, which is why is there this intensely Kabbalistic, esoteric, I mean, even for Shaar HaYichud VeHaEmunah, which is deep Chassidus, but chapter 5 is like really Kabbalistic. I don't want to call it jargon because that has like a negative connotation, but it's like really abstruse. And that's one of the Rebbe's questions, like, what's this doing here? It doesn't seem to be furthering our understanding of oneness of Hashem. It seems to be just getting into real nitty-gritty Kabbalistic terminology. But at any rate, so you're going to see, probably it'll take us 5 minutes to actually go through the chapter itself. But I'll tell you another story. There was a group of Satmar Chassidim who were interested in learning Chassidus. But this is back in the 70s. And there was, I'll say, a certain fear or lack of trust regarding Chassidus and Chabad and the Rebbe's teachings. And I mean, Baruch Hashem, today, in today's day and age, things are very open and warm and friendly. And when you tell people what it was like in the old days, it's almost hard to imagine. But there was a group of Satmar Chassidim who were learning Tanya with Rebbe Yoel Khan, Olav Shalom, and one of their conditions with him is that when we're learning Chassidus Chabad, we can only learn the first 5 generations. We can't learn from the Rebbe or even from his father-in-law, the previous Rebbe, because that's when Chabad became, it took like a turn and became whatever. In their eyes, it became something they didn't want to be exposed to. So Rabbi Yoel was learning with them Tanya, and they came to chapter 5 of Shaar VeHaEmunah, and they learned the perek, and after they learned it, Rabbi Yoel asked them all of the questions that the Rebbe asked in the Sikha that I mentioned, which again I think is Mishpatim Tavshin Chavav. So he asked all the questions. The Rebbe asks at least I think 10 questions about the chapter, what it's doing, why it's written the way it is, why it's where it is. And he asked them all the questions, and they were like, yeah, those are good questions. Yeah, why? He's like, I'm sorry, we made an agreement. I can't tell you, because you said we're only going to learn the first 5 generations of Chabad. So these questions the Rebbe asked and answered, so I can't share with you the answers. So that broke them, and they said, okay, you could tell us. And that's when they had their little breakthrough. I shouldn't call it a little breakthrough, had a big breakthrough. And they understood that it's all one chain. And to understand the Alter Rebbe's Tanya, you need the explanations of his descendant, of the Rebbe. At any rate, let's just try to do this as best we can. Perek Hey, chapter 5. V'hine al zeh omru razal. Regarding what? In chapter 4, we left off, we were speaking about Gvura. I mean, the theme of chapter 4 was Gvura and tzimtzum, about the concealment. And we had just said that the letters are kalim. Remember that? At the end of chapter 4, we said that the letters are kalim and they come from the 5 Gvurais of Atik. So regarding this concept of tzimtzum, our sages said, B'tchila, in the beginning, Ola b'machshava, it arose to Hashem's mind, Livra yasa olam b'midas hadin, to create the world through the midas hadin. Din is gvura. Ra'a, however, he saw she'ein ha'olam miskayim, that the world wouldn't be able to subsist. Shitav bei midas rachamim, he partnered with it the attribute of rachamim, compassion, mercy. So, what does this mean? Hashem originally thought to create the world with midas hadin. It doesn't say to conduct the world with midas hadin. It says to create the world with midas hadin. How do you create the world with midas hadin? I thought din or gvura or tzimtzum was a buffer or a blocker that diminishes the creative energy. How do you create with the lack of creative energy? This is one of the questions that Rebbe asks. So basically what the Rebbe says is this is the point of this chapter. The point of this chapter is to further our understanding, because without the Rebbe's commentary, you're going to read this chapter and it's going to get into some really Kabbalistic stuff, as I mentioned. And it starts talking about the neshama of Moshe Rabbeinu and its perception of the midos, and it's going to talk about neshamas in Gan Eden and how they perceive the midos, and all types of stuff that's very lofty, and it's like, what does it have to do with the oneness of Hashem in this world? So the Rebbe says, really, you have to understand what the point of this chapter is. This short little chapter is helping us to understand more fully the concept that was introduced in chapter 4, the concept of tzimtzum. That we shouldn't think of tzimtzum as an absence of something. We shouldn't think of it like there's the or and then the lack thereof. That would be a mistake. In that case, basically what we would be thinking is that creation is a phenomenon which doesn't really exist because it's a non-entity brought into being by a non-entity. Meaning, tzimtzum, if it were not to exist, if it were just the lack of something, then that which it creates is not really real. And what chapter 5 is explaining to us is that tzimtzum is real, and that gvura is real, and that gvura is godliness, just like chesed is godliness, and that the kelim are creative, just like the light, the oir is creative. So that's why it's possible, in theory, and it was actually considered, so to speak, to create the world with midas hadin. Don't think of midas hadin as the lack of light. Think of it as a creative power unto itself. Now, in actuality, the world that would be created purely with kelim would be too brutal of a world. You think this world is brutal? It is, but and how do I know it's brutal? Because maybe I'm too sensitive. I could say my experience is this world's brutal, but maybe I'm sensitive. I am sensitive, so maybe it's not, because it says in Tanya that kol ma'ase elam hazik koshim v'rayim rishayim goivrim bay. That the deeds of this world are tough and bad, and the bad guys prevail. So it says in Tanya this is a brutal world. At any rate, you think this world's brutal? Imagine if it were created purely with midas hadin. So that's what it means. Hashem saw it wouldn't last, so he introduced the midas harachamim. What's the midas harachamim? Dahainu, that is to say, specifically, he's galus elokus al yedei tzadikim, a revelation of godliness in this world through tzadikim, the esis emevsim Shabbat Torah, and through the signs and wonders that are in the Torah. So there are two ways where this harsh world gets a little bit of respite, where we can get a glimpse that there is an Eibishter. We see it in tzaddikim, and we see it in the miracles of the Torah. That's our glimpse behind the veil. V'hinei al zeh amru b'zayir. Okay, now here comes the real Kabbalistic stuff. And I'm going to try to explain as best I can how the Rebbe explains the purpose of this Kabbalistic stuff here. Regarding this, the Zayir says, De la'ela besitr de kedusha ilah, that above, in the supernal realm of holiness, is yamina v'is smala, there is right and there is left. Dahainu chesed gvura, which are chesed and gvura. Right and left are chesed and gvura. Pirush, that means de shtehen hein midas elokus, they're both godly attributes. Lamayla meseichel anivroim v'hasagosam, which are higher than the comprehension of created beings. Diyu v'gamei ichad be'ilam ho'atzilus, that he, I'll read it like this, and his vessels, meaning the light and the vessels, are one in the world of Atzilus. Meaning to say, this is doubling down on something that we learned in chapter 4, that do not think that Gvura is secondary to Chesed. Gvura is just as godly as Chesed and just as ultimately incomprehensible to us because of its godliness as Chesed. Va'af hasogas Moshe Rabbeinu alav shalom bin nevuasei, and even Moshe Rabbeinu in his prophetic state, Loi hoysu ba'elam ha'tzilis, did not go up to that level, Ela ayedei slapshusei ba'elam abriya, except that level of Atzilus coming down and being invested in Bria. Okay, now we're getting super technical. What do I have to know about this? This is Moshe Rabbeinu's prophetic state. We're going to find out he didn't understand Chesed and Gvura of Atzilus except as they were filtered through Bria. Va'av gam zeis, and even in that, Loi b'shtei midas elu Chesed and Gvura, it wasn't Chesed and Gvura, ela ayedei slapshusan b'midas shalamata mehen b'midrega shein midas netzach hoid yisaid. It was Chesed and Gvura coming down even lower into netzach hoid and yisaid kamesha kosav b'shara nevuah, like it's written in the Arizal's Shara nevuah. Okay. So the Rebbe asks about this. Why do I need to know this? We're not just learning interesting things. There's a purpose of this sefer, and you all know the purpose of the sefer. We learned it in the Hakdama called Chinuch Kotten. This is to increase our Ava and Yira of Hashem, and the way we increase our Ava and Yira of Hashem is to understand HaYichud VeHaEmunah, Hashem's oneness. How do we need? What is this? What is knowing about the particular manner in which Moshe Rabbeinu perceived or did not perceive the midos of Hashem? What does that do to enrich our understanding of the oneness of Hashem? So the Rebbe explains it like this. It's furthering this point that tzimtzum is a real entity. It's not just the lack of something. Because the ramifications here, first of all, if tzimtzum is not real, if it's just the lack of something, then the world is not real, which means then our mitzvahs are not real.
Why does it
Because mitzvahs are physical actions which employ physical objects. And if we make the physical object holy by using it to do Hashem's will, but you're telling me that it was always holy because it's all God, because really it's just a laser light show, it's all just our subjective impression, then nothing's really happening when we do a mitzvah. So we have to understand that there is actually something happening. There's a real tzimtzum. It's not just an impression that we're garnering. It's not just our lack of ability to perceive the or. We're perceiving kalim, and kalim are not just the lack of or. Kalim are something. Now then there's a whole other question. Well, then what are the kalim? Okay, so the kalim and the or are really one. It's all God. And at the end, we're not seeing God because God is blocking God. So instead of seeing God, we're seeing God. Okay, but that's we're going to talk about that more in the next chapter. The point is, we need to know that tzimtzum is a real thing, and that not only for us, but even for Moshe Rabbeinu, because wait till you say, well, for us tzimtzum is real. No, it's objectively real, that even if you're Moshe Rabbeinu, tzimtzum is a real thing, and you experience creation through this filter, even Moshe Rabbeinu. And because you're going to say, there are certain tzaddikim, they're at such a lofty level, they see through it, and they see the divine code behind everything, and they realize that the world's not real. Well, chas v'sholom, because then you're saying, then for them, mitzvahs are not real. So what we're saying is, we're using Moshe Rabbeinu as our example, that even for Moshe Rabbeinu, tzimtzum is a real thing. Now, furthermore, this part seems even more impractical and abstract and removed from our experience. Furthermore, he's going to explain now what it's like in Gan Eden for the neshamas. Rak shematan schorim shel tzadikim began Eden hu asagas haspashtos hachayus va'oira nimshach mishtei midas elu chesed ugvura. The neshamas in Gan Eden, they are able to appreciate chesed and gvura. V'hu mazin ha-neshamas ha-tzadikim she'asku b'teil lishma ba'ilam hazeh. And they experience Hashem's chesed and gvura in Gan Eden as food. It is like food for them. Ki me'espashtos shtei midas elu nimtoch rakia ala neshamas shebegan Eden, because from the spreading forth of these two midas, chesed and gvura in Atzilos, there is a canopy of dew. I think that's, anyone has the English there? That's how I would translate it. A canopy of dew that is spread forth for these souls in Gan Eden. V'rakia zeh nikra raza de'iraisa, and this firmament, this canopy, is referred to as the mystery of the Torah. Ubai seid chav beis oisias ha-Torah, and this is the secret of the 22 letters. Hanasuna mishtei midas elu, which were given from these two midos, K'dechsiv, like it says about the giving of the Torah, miminai, from his right hand, Eish das lama, he gave a fiery law. So right is chesed, fire is gvura, Torah is chesed and gvura. And from this canopy, there it drips forth dew as sustenance for the souls. That means that they are able to perceive the secret behind the 22 letters. Because this firmament is the secret of das. And the Torah that they learned while in this world is the food for the souls in heaven. Mitzvahs, whereas the mitzvahs they did during their embodiment, hein levushim, are the clothing for the souls in Gan Eden. K'mavur kol zeh, like all of this is explained, b'Zohar v'Yakol daf reish tas v'reish yod. It's explained in the Zohar, and he gives the citation. Ube'etz Chaim, it's also in the Arizal. Shaar mem daled perek gimel. And that's the end. Yeah, that's the end of short little chapter 5. Very short, but very abstract and abstruse. But what the Rebbe is explaining is that we need to get this clear before we continue. We have to understand that tzimtzum is an entity just as much as the or is an entity, godly entity. That creation comes about through tzimtzum, not in a way of there's or and the lack thereof, but rather tzimtzum itself is, ironically, paradoxically, a projection of godliness, even though conceptually it seems to be the opposite of a projection. It seems to be like the prevention of projection. And that this holds true even for the soul of Moshe Rabbeinu, and even for the souls in Gan Eden who are privy to some level of revelation, but it comes through a process through which they're capable of internalizing it. And then if you'll notice, there's a bracket at the end of the chapter. And here's something radical that the Rebbe explains in this sikha that I've been trying to base myself on and not doing justice to in the slightest. If you look at the end of chapter 4, you'll notice that there are brackets at the end of chapter 4, like the last paragraph of chapter 4 is in brackets, where he starts speaking about the Isius or the Kalim. So the Rebbe actually says that those brackets never end, and they continue into chapter 5. And that the entirety of chapter 5 is subsumed within the brackets that began at the end of chapter 4. And so the entire thing is a parenthetical statement, but a necessary parenthetical statement. And in fact, the Rebbe says, in Likutei Amonim Chelik Aleph, in the 53 chapters, we're familiar with the concept of the Hagah, when there's the Hagah, right? So there's not like footnotes at the bottom, but there are glosses internally. When it has like a little different font, a little smaller, and like in the middle there's a break, it says Hagah, like a gloss or a note. So, and he uses it quite often. Why does the Alter Rebbe not use that in Shaar HaYichud VeHaEmunah? He could have used it, he could have employed that same, I guess you could call it typography, I don't know how you call it, but he could have used that same mechanism. So, the Rebbe says that, no, this is not a Hagah, this is not a side point. And I don't mean that the Hagahs in Chelik Aleph are mamish side points, but what I'm saying is this is not even a lesser point. This is an essential point. The Rebbe says if you don't have this understanding, you're going to make dangerous theological mistakes.
Such as?
What I said earlier. Who caught it?
There's no world.
That there's really no world. That it's really just subjective. That it's really just, there's reality and the lack thereof, and we're living in the lack thereof. And what this chapter is making very clear is that the created reality is totally real. Now, it's not the complete reality, it's not the complete story. The complete story is that created reality exists, and yet it's not separate from Hashem's absolute existence. So that's like the paradox. And as he goes on in chapter 6, he's going to explain this much more thoroughly, how what we perceive as created reality is not a separate existence from the absolute reality of Hashem. But it's very important to understand that we don't explain away the problem of the world. The world is a problem, not because we don't like it, but because it's a theological problem. You understand that the premise here, where we're starting from the very beginning of this book, is the world poses a theological problem. How can we say Ein milvade? How can we say there's nothing but God? But God and his world, and the world's subservient to him and smaller than him and in control of him, by him, but
Because he created it.
so Hashem created the world, so it's a lesser existence. It's the creation, he's the creator, and it's coming and saying, no, Ein milvade, there's really nothing but him. What do you mean there's nothing but him? And the world. So one easy way to solve that theological problem is just to say, as lahavdil, other mystical traditions do say, never mind, there isn't a world. There isn't. It doesn't exist. And that's how they solve that problem. Now, we don't solve that problem that way. And first of all, because it's not true. But secondly, if we were to solve the problem that way, then what does it do to the entire concept of mitzvahs? Basically, it turns the whole thing into a simulation, into a video game that has no real relevance. The whole concept, and if you learn Tanya, the first volume, and you understand what our mitzvahs really do, that they are the mechanisms by which this world is refined and create a dira b'tachtenim, so then you're saying the whole dira b'tachtenim thing is a simulation, it's not real. So we don't say that. What we say is, tzimtzum is real, the world is real. However, the nature of its reality is not the way we perceive it. There's more to its reality than how we have been perceiving it. But we're not going to explain it away by saying it's not real. And so this is the point. He doesn't want you to learn the concept of tzimtzum and misuse the concept of tzimtzum to convince yourself that the world is an illusion. It's not an illusion. Even for neshamas like Moshe Rabbeinu who see the truth, even for the souls in Gan Eden who see the truth, tzimtzum continues to be real, even because if tzimtzum's not real for the neshamas in Gan Eden, then how are they experiencing Gan Eden? Gan Eden itself should be nullified out of existence once they see the truth. The point is they see the truth, and what truth do they see? They see that there is a creation. Okay, a spiritual creation, the world of Bria. But the point is that all of this stuff is objectively real. Yeah, what were you going to say?
I'm not understanding how perception of separateness makes the mitzvos more real. Because even if there wasn't a separateness, then we would just organically live within the code of mitzvos. It would still exist, but why does the separateness affect the mitzvos?
Why does the separateness affect the mitzvahs? Like, if we took away all this concept of separateness, well, ultimately there is no separateness. But what we're saying is that you want to call it separateness. The separateness is the illusion. The separateness is the illusion. But creation is not an illusion. The nature of it is confusing. We're mistaken about the nature of creation, which is why we're learning this. But creation never ceases to be real the more that you learn about tzimtzum. And so I'm going to answer your question by changing your question slightly, which is, what could I misunderstand about tzimtzum that would cause me to misunderstand mitzvahs? And the answer is, I could learn some inspiring Kabbalistic concepts and I could come to the conclusion that everything's already all God. So what point is there in taking the hide of an animal and turning it into parchment and writing Hebrew words on it and putting it in boxes and putting on tefillin? It's already holy. It's already godly. When it was a cow, it was just as holy.
Because we don't do things because we're holy. holy, we do them because they're the will of God.
Okay, that's a very nice answer. We do it because it's the will of God. But what's that will? The will that what? What should happen? What is God willing here? He's willing that you, in your embodied state, should take a physical object and sanctify that physical object. That's what a mitzvah is. That's what if you remember chapter 35, for instance, in VeHaEmunah Chelik Aleph, that's what we learned. That's the whole point of the mitzvahs. Yeah?
I think, tell me if I'm wrong, but I'm trying to imagine the flip side of what could go wrong. It's basically people thinking that we live in like a world of holograms, basically, like
right.
in the ether, basically. Like,
yeah.
Do we really exist? Does a hologram really exist?
Right. And therefore the whole thing is really just, it's all a subjective experience. Nothing actually is happening. Nothing's really happening.
But how does the filtering contribute to the physicality? Why does that impact our experience physically? Even if we had more revelation, oneness.
The filtering contributes to the physicality because remember at the end of chapter 4 when he said that the letters are the vessels, the kalim. Mm-hmm. So kalim is a very important concept there. First of all, it's not that we have light and the lack of light. Something and the lack thereof. No. It's the light and the vessels. So even that which is obstructing the light is an entity just like the light is an entity. Now, ultimately, they're both godly entities, but the point is, and they're both God. And I don't want to give away the spoiler, but in chapter 6, I'll explain it's Havaya and Elohim. I mean, you could probably figure that out already on your own. But so Hashem is Havaya, Hashem is Elohim, Havaya Hu Elohim. But the point is, it's not like there's the light and the lack of the light. It's the light and the vessels. So the vessels are giving, remember we talked about they give articulation to the light. Like remember we said about the 5 compartments of speech, how you compress the air, and by stopping the flow of the air is how you actually create intelligible speech. So again, the point is that which is containing the light is just as godly and just as creative as the light. Creation, what you're calling separation, but I'll call the illusion of separation, because the separation actually is the illusion. But creation is that product of vessels. Because when you have containers, you have definition. The limits, the definition, the contours, the shape of things, which give things their identity as being distinct or discrete. That's the function of the vessels. So that's what the vessels are doing. And if you didn't have that, or if that weren't real, then basically you would say there are no real definitions, there are no real differences, and therefore I've accomplished nothing by turning the cowhide into the tefillin. I've accomplished nothing by consuming the kosher food and burning those calories to daven and to learn. Because any transformation that occurred, that's just subjective. There's no transformation really happening. It's all God to begin with. So I have to know, no, the kalim, the vessels, are creating certain definitions, and now I'm empowered through Torah to work within those definitions and make upgrades, and to take something that wasn't holy and make it holy.
Is our free will part of Hashem like that?
Okay, free will is another discussion. That's another area of theology.
If he created us with vessels and ore, then the only thing that's separate, like individual, I guess, for us to use to bring him here, so to speak, is based on what we decide to do.
Okay, so let's just simplify it without getting into a philosophical discussion about free will. Just say the mitzvahs.
Yeah, but somebody has to do them. And
Right.
Us.
Right. Yeah. I just don't want to get it. I just don't want to use the word free will because it just opens up a whole other philosophical discussion, which we're having fun enough already. So I don't want to add to our fun. So what I'm saying is, let's just say it like this. I want to simplify what you're saying. Okay. Once we understand what tzimtzum really is, then we understand just how essential our mitzvahs are. And that, yes, we have to do them. We do the mitzvahs.
And that's real.
And that's real. Yeah.
That's not a figment of Hashem's imagination.
Correct.
That's us.
That's us doing it. And who's us? Us, that's the product of tzimtzum and containers and vessels. And the things we're doing the mitzvahs with, that's containers. Right, yeah.
Why would I ever assume that those containers, vessels, constrictions, limitations, so to speak, but therefore the articulations of what Hashem is and wants, why would I ever think that was not holy until I made it into its filling? Why would the cowhide itself not be holy? Anything that's an expression of Hashem is holy before I even make a mitzvah out of it.
Well, I'm saying that's the mistake. The mistake would be that really there are no distinctions, there are no differentiations, so it's all God, and it's all on the same level. And what we're saying is, no, the distinctions are happening.
So this distinction actually makes it less holy?
Yeah, there are gradations of holiness. Of course.
How are those assigned?
Well, Hashem assigns them. But we know that there is, and we learn about it in Likutei Moharan Chelek Aleph, that there's Kedusha and there's Klippa, and within Klippa there's irredeemable Klippa, and then there's the Klippa that can be transformed or elevated. So those are real distinctions. Those are real designations. Yeah.
We learn that the soul comes down for a greater return.
Right.
But if the separateness is an illusion, then how does that make sense?
The soul comes down for the sake of the world. And the separateness is the illusion, right? Because I'm saying the nature of created reality is not independent of creator. But what's not an illusion is that the world was less holy before your soul entered it. And now because of your soul entering the world and doing mitzvahs in the world has objectively actually become holier. And that's real. And if you misunderstand tzimtzum, you won't understand how real the effect your soul had on the world is.
Because of removing klippa?
Removing klippa, elevating, transforming. Yeah.
When the world was created, was it created like this, or this is only after the chit?
Okay, so that's a good technical question. So the answer is it's a combination of both. It's one, there's a certain level of tzimtzum required just to create the world. And then there's a compounding or aggravating factor of the sin of the tree of knowledge. But yeah, it's either way. The point is that there's an actual situation. It's not just in our head, and we are able to actually improve that situation. It's not just perspective. It's not, oh, you were looking at it all wrong. In that case, go stand in the corner and meditate and realize Enid Movade, and the world will be perfected. Which I'm not saying doesn't have value. That does have value, but you still got to do mitzvahs. Why? Because that's what will actually upgrade things from non-holy to holy. So just knowing that Enid Movade alone I shouldn't say it doesn't have that effect, because he explains in the first volume of Tanya that when your physical brain gets that concept, there's a certain physical refinement that happens there as well. The fact that a finite brain, a human mind, is able to be a home to those thoughts is itself an act of physical refinement. But it's not enough. It has to lead to actual mitzvahs.
Why did God want us to know how He originally intended to emanate?
Why should we know that it was considered? Like, would you tell your kid, by the way, before the bris, we thought about a different name, and at the last minute, your mother decided no, she doesn't like that name, and that's why your name is Kloinimus. Why do we have to know that he originally intended?
Assuming He wants us to know something.
Okay. So there are many answers to that question, but for our context, the reason why it's important information is even to understand that it's a possibility. Because if you didn't understand what tzimtzum is, you wouldn't think there's a concept of creating the world purely with tzimtzum. How can you create with non-creation? And what he's explaining is, no. The Midas Hadin is also creative. Just like Chesed is creative, Din is creative.
Is it To increase all.
It's not the lack of creativity. It's another type of creativity. Now, in the end, he decided if he were to only employ that mode of creativity, meaning only vessels, the world would be impossible to live in. We wouldn't even be able to do our mission. So he gave us a glimpse where the way to best describe it, I think, is a little bit of light that circumvents the vessels. A little bit of light that bypasses the vessels. And then you can get a glimpse that there's something beyond. And that's what keeps us going. He says, and that's through the tzaddikim and through the miracles that are in the Torah. Okay, so that's this short little chapter to the best of our ability. Now, if you're still with us, you're watching online, you're still with us. I'm talking to the people online.
Donate.
Donate. But hold on, let me ease into it. Okay, I want to say it like this. Yes, we are creating a physical space for spiritual growth. There's a SoulWords house, a half a block from the aisle, from the Lubavitcher Rebbe's resting place. We're doing campaign June 18th and 19th. But we will take your donations now. You can go to charity with a D, CHARIDY.com/RST, and you can donate now. It will work. The pre-donate button works. And here's the deal. There is a team, what's it called? Tanya team or the 5 Towns Tanya team? It has some type of Monday Tanya class. I don't remember what it's called, but you'll recognize it. You could donate under this team. You can even leave a little note and say, like, I study Tanya with you guys, and I want my money to be counting toward your team.
The Wednesday Mimer team.
We combined the Wednesday Mimer team.
Monday.
Today's Monday. It's called 5 Towns Tanya class. So we combined the Wednesday class with the Monday class. So if you watch the Mimer class or if you watch the Tanya class, it's basically all, it's this, right, Levi's library.
This
class.
energy.
Yeah, this energy, exactly. So we need a lot of money to make this happen, so don't hold back. What? Donations are doubled. It's a matching campaign. Every dollar you give will be doubled. That is correct. Mitzvah Hashem, we are going to create a physical space as an embodiment of all the wonderful spiritual energy over here. Okay.